Joining us now, my broadcast partner on the Bills Radio Network, Eric Wood, color analyst for the broadcasts. And Eric, some pretty big news here over the last week plus since we last spoke. I guess first we should begin with you and your assessment of the decision to move on from Sean McDermott after 9 seasons. Then we'll get into what's happened since then.
Yeah, I would say obviously a tough decision to make. You know, you had so much success with Sean over the years, respect him as a person and who he is as a man. And it's tough to let a guy like that go because he didn't necessarily do anything egregious, nothing blatant, nothing obvious to move on. But, you know, in leadership, you got to make tough decisions. And obviously, Terry Pegula, Brandon Beane, Pete Quelly, the leadership in that front office made this decision. And so, you know, honestly, incredibly grateful for my opportunity to be able to play for Sean, for what he's done for this organization, setting it up and giving this springboard now to Joe Brady, who's going to take over. A lot of gratitude for me with Sean McDermott and honestly wish him nothing but the best. And, you know, hopefully when he lands on his feet, whenever he chooses to, it's over in the NFC. It'll be because I'll be rooting for him regardless.
Yeah, the way this ended after a loss in the playoffs on the road in Denver with a quirky non-catch call from the officials, like the 4th down spot in Kansas City, like the Diggs drop here in Buffalo and Kansas City, and, you know, the overtime where Josh never saw the ball in Kansas City. There's just one loss of a quirky nature after another. And it starts, because they're all so unique, they all start to look alike. You think that played into this?
Yeah, I certainly do. And, Steve, you kind of ruined it for everyone that's got to comment on this after your 2% speech. I mean, it was spot on, but it is what it is. And, you know, to get over the hump, it's hard to just watch it end in a similar fashion. And, you know, I sympathize with the leadership saying, look, what we've been has been great. You know, since 2020, we got the best record in the league, the best point differential in the league, but we're just not making those plays in the playoffs or this year. You know, without knowing any insider information on this, I think it had to play into a factor. You lose that game down in Atlanta. You lose that game at home to New England. You lose that game down at Miami. You looked flat for a lot of first halves this year, in a season where it just, I mean, look, New England comes out of the AFC and on their way to the Super Bowl, they beat Pittsburgh, who's looked awful down the stretch. They played Justin Herbert, who's played awful in the playoffs, and they played Jarrett Stidham. I mean, it's just one of those situations where it irks you and it eats at you, and you think we just got to be better and let's try and figure this out. I also think when you get a situation like in Tampa where maybe they held on to Todd Bowles a little too long and Liam Cohen leaves and you see his success, that I don't think teams around the league have ignored that, to where maybe a newer trend is in your own building. And, you know, we'll see how this all shakes out. But honestly, you know, I think all of that plays into a factor when you consider letting Sean go.
And then let's spin it forward to the decision now with Joe Brady ascending to the head coaching role. They interviewed 9 candidates in all over the course of 6 days, a whirlwind schedule, and they land on Brady at the end of it, who was the first person to interview. And there's no secret that there were 5 other clubs with open jobs that he interviewed with for the head coaching position, 2 of which he interviewed for a second time, Baltimore and Arizona. And in addition to that, I think the Bills knew if they went with someone else, that means Brady is out the door. And we know Sean Payton was interested in bringing him on as an OC. I think at the very least he's an OC somewhere in the league. Maybe he's a head coach. And they just felt that that was too much to part with. So how much of a factor do you believe outside interest in Brady was in him getting the job, and continuity with what they already have here with Brady as OC? Maybe weigh those 2 things out for me in the decision to make Brady the head coach.
Yeah, I would say, you know, sometimes when other people show attention to either something you have or whatever that may be, it makes you appreciate it just a little bit more. And that's definitely going to play a factor. I think even more so than that was how impressed they were with him through the interview process, which is much different than him interviewing to be an offensive coordinator. I believe those can just be done with the head coach and him making those decisions, not with the entire front office present, and not nearly as long and thorough of an interview process. And I do think the fact that they have familiarity and the knowledge of him as a person, as a leader, a communicator, and seeing that on a day-to-day basis, that gives you a comfort level where, some of these hot names right now, they've never been a head coach. You don't know how they're going to react when they suddenly are thrust into a leadership position. Some of these guys are very young. I understand Joe's young, but he's been doing it, and you've seen it in person, so you have confidence in that. Some of these other guys, you don't necessarily know how they're going to react standing in front of 50-something alpha males each and every day, and you hit adversity, and are you going to be able to handle all of that? And look, I'll say this. If you showed the resume of Joe Brady to Bills Mafia and he came from the Shanahan or the McVay tree, we'd have a parade right now in downtown Buffalo. I understand that people have had some qualms about play calling and game management, first halves, especially with this offense, especially this past year. But if he was coming from the McVay tree and 2 years ago, Stafford wins an MVP, and last year, Kyron Williams wins the rushing title, and you could do it both ways, you would say he would be the hottest candidate in the league. He
Right.
truly would be. That's where the world is right now, where you come from a McVay or Shanahan tree, you're on the fast track immediately. So I'm excited for Joe. I've had some experience being around him. I had to talk our boy Ryan Fitzpatrick off the ledge. He called me before he called B, and I don't know if you guys saw the Fitz and Wit podcast where he said he called, or he got to hop on the phone call with Brandon B, and I talked to him first. He didn't know a whole lot about Joe Brady. Well, one of Fitz's big things was, this can't be a drinking buddy of Josh's. This can't be a golfing buddy of Josh's. This got to be someone that holds him accountable. I said, well, to my knowledge, Joe Brady doesn't really drink. He doesn't really play golf. And if he wasn't in the booth these last couple of years and he was on the sideline, you'd probably understand that there's a certain level of accountability that Joe brings on a day-to-day basis to that quarterback room, to the offense. You got a little peek behind the scenes of that in training camp. A lot of that was him rewarding players and talking about, this is what we expect, and using some colorful language at that. That was one of the episodes we had to tell the kids, our kids watching, hey, earmuffs for this part of the episode when Joe Brady's up. But he brings a passion. He brings a confidence about him and the way he walks and handles himself that you hope the team emulates moving forward. And a guy and I'm honestly excited about it. I've been getting blasted on social media for, obviously being a Bills homer.
Right.
And look, I would be trying to spin it in a positive direction no matter what here, just with my affiliation with the Bills, my relationship with so many people within the building. I'll be dead honest. I am much more excited about Joe Brady coming in than I would have been with a lot of the other candidates. I'll say that.
Yeah, and one of the things about it is Bills fans feel like maybe Joe Brady's not enough of a change, that him being in the building and all that won't be enough of a shakeup. It won't be a new voice. But if you speak to, and I know I feel this way, maybe you don't feel this way, a new head coach, even if it was a guy that was standing in the room next to a new guy is a new voice, and it makes a massive difference, even if everybody knows who the guy is.
All right, so just to your point, I played for 2 interim coaches. So mid-season, so we had the entire same staff just to switch a head coach. Perry Fuel in place of Dick Duran my rookie year, Anthony Lynn in place of Rex Ryan. The messaging's different. The travel attire's different. There's so much that changes when a head coach steps in, even if he's from the current staff. I do think we're going to have a lot of change on this staff, and there will be a lot of change in this building. And not that if someone was groomed their entire career by Sean McDermott, it still wouldn't be a change. But the fact that Joe Brady has come up under other coaches, yes, he has been here for the last 3 or so seasons, but he came up in this league under other head coaches, and he'll take on the personality of himself. He's a confident enough individual, comfortable enough in his own skin that he's going to be Joe Brady. But I wouldn't expect, there will be influences from Sean on his career. I'm sure you spend enough time around someone in a building, there's going to be influences, but I don't think it's going to look and feel the same from our standpoint or from the team standpoint.
So now that, Joe Brady is in the CEO role with respect to the coaching staff, what we're asking our listeners this today, Eric, what do you need to hear from Joe Brady at his press conference tomorrow to feel comfortable about him now sitting in that CEO role?
I don't think him winning the press conference is going to do much for me personally. Now, I'd imagine a lot of Bills fans want to hear about, what his vision is, if this is going to be a very similar offense, or if maybe there was some schematic things that were influenced by the last coaching staff, what the direction is on the defensive side of the football. That to me matters a great deal. One of the issues that I generally have with hiring a first-time head coach is filling out that staff, especially if it's a young guy. He just doesn't have as many relationships in the league to be able to fill out a staff. Now, you'll lean on a Brandon Beane, you lean on, other guys that you might be retaining to, facilitate those relationships. You lean on your agent at a time like this to bring in other guys that maybe are under the same umbrella of an agency. But I'd love to hear, what his direction is from his staff. And, to me, we're talking about a press conference, and, obviously last week there was so much made out of the press conference with Terry Pagula and Brandon Beane. I tuned in a lot to One Bills Live last week, and I didn't envy your seats. I'll just say that. But look, I appreciate where this organization's at right now, where we're not looking to win a press conference. We don't need to announce that we're bringing in TO to boost season ticket sales. You got to trust the front office in this decision. And the fact that they knew, look, the Bills are not dumb. No one in the upstairs of the building didn't think that when they announced that Joe Brady was going to be the hire, that there was going to be a lot of pushback, especially after all the pushback with Sean McDermott getting let go. To me, that shows extreme confidence in Joe Brady. And to me, it almost kind of drove a nail in it. Like, I trust these guys. And they knew that if you hire some young, good-looking, hotshot coordinator, that Bills fans are going to be excited. Maybe there's a couple suites sold, whatever that may be. They're not worried about that. They're worried about chasing a Super Bowl and not winning press conferences. And so kind of tying it all back together, I can't wait to hear from Joe Brady, and I can't wait to hear some of the direction that, he sees fit to relay to us through that opening press conference. But man, I had a conversation with a former employee for the Bills talking about this Joe Brady decision, and said, hey, we won a lot of press conferences during the 2010s. We didn't win a lot of games.
Right.
They don't need to worry about winning press conferences. They're worried about winning games.
So let's our topic for our show has been and is today, what do you need to hear from Brady in this press conference?
Yeah, I mean, and I would love to hear the fan perspective on what they do want to hear from him. Now, coach speak and all that only goes so far, but I understand they want to hear, more from Joe Brady. I hear a ton from him each and every week when he does the press conferences early in the week after the games. A lot of times he does the interviews with Chris before the games on our pregame coverage. So you get to hear from him a good amount. But just taking over that head seat, to me, it's, kind of what's your vision for this football team? Offensively, you assume it'll be fairly the same, where Joe Brady loves to attack matchups, whether that's on the ground, whether that's through the air, attack matchups. Defensively, I'd love to know what direction, he wants to go. And oftentimes it's interesting. Oftentimes you'll go with a coordinator that you feel like that, style is the hardest to go against. For instance, when Sean McDermott got the job here, he hired Rick Dennison to be our offensive coordinator because he always felt like that Kubiak, Shanahan, that offense was the toughest to go against. So you bring in someone like that. We'll see if we get that type of response, but it'd be interesting to hear that from Joe Brady's perspective.
And then, Eric, I don't know if you saw the reports, but ESPN was reporting that Jim Leonhard's a front runner to be the defensive coordinator here in Buffalo. The Jets had also expressed interest, but they have since hired a defensive coordinator for their staff from Miami. I believe he was a teammate of yours for one season here when he came back to the club in 2013. He did more with less in Wisconsin when he was the defensive coordinator there, had some top 5 finishes defensively with a roster that had more smart players than 5-star athletes. What can you tell us just about your relative familiarity being around Jim for that season?
Yeah, I played against Jimmy a bunch earlier in my career when he was with the Jets, and then got to play with him in 2013. Very smart teammate. He's smart in the coaching ranks now, but one of those guys where you just felt like if he wants to be a coach, he's going to be a coach one day. He's brilliant. He's a great communicator. He's got a gravitating personality. Those guys, when they become coaches, they're rock stars. That's just the personality. You could see it, you could feel it when they're players. And so, I've followed Jimmy in his career, and generally it's got some Rex influence with some complex blitz schemes and different looks, more simplified at the college level because you generally need to be. Those guys aren't as advanced football wise. But I don't want to say, some Rex influence and have that scare people, because I'll say this: earlier in my career, when we were facing the Jets, nightmare preparing for the Jets. I know it didn't end well here in Buffalo, but it was a nightmare prepping for Rex's defenses earlier in my career. And to have some of that influence, and I've loved his messaging throughout his career, Jimmy Leonhard, that is, where it's, we want to dictate to the offense. We want them to have to be reactionary to us. Now, you do that in one of two ways. It's either personnel or scheme, and you can do it both ways. The Cleveland Browns dictate on a week-to-week basis where they put Myles Garrett. They don't need to blitz anyone to mess with your protection schemes or where you're running the football. Other teams got to do it schematically. And, you could probably bet right now where we sit, we're probably thinking, hey, schematically, let's get in someone who can really stress an offense, just based upon the turnover that you're likely going to see on the defense side of the football.
Good stuff, Eric. Thanks for spending some time with us. Enjoy this offseason. We're just getting started.
I appreciate it. Yeah, it's been a wild one so far, but y'all have a great week.